This is Freeze, and you're watching Thorin season, and I would have been better than forgiven if I wouldn't get injured.
G2 Esports' coach Grabbz has an amazing resume for, quite frankly, any region as a coach. Internationally, he has won the mid-season invitational last year. At Worlds, he has been a runner-up last year, and then 2 years ago, his team was in the semi-finals. Back-to-back top 4 finishes at Worlds. Very rare that anyone's done that. Pretty much with looking at people from China or Korea when we talk about that. Then you go to the domestic world. He's won the LEC 3 times in a row at that, by the way. Spring, summer last year, spring now. And then if you go back to Season 8, he was second place in the spring. Yet, despite this amazing track record, he is, sometimes it feels like almost entirely overlooked for his coaching prowess. Rarely is he ever considered as the best coach in his region, the West, and forget the world. In fact, forget the idea that he's not considered. He's rarely even sort of like put in the conversation. That's the key thing for me. It's not that no one thinks he is. It's that no one even seems to debate it. It's like they immediately dismiss him and start looking at some of the other names that they can go to. So why is that? Well, for me, it's largely about narratives and about how the context from and conclusions from which narratives tend to be drawn can obviously haunt someone and can be a label that's attached that's really tough to get off, really tough to scrub off, as it were, a black mark on your name. So first of all, there's history. Before he was in G2, before he had these superstar players, who was he? Well, he was the coach of Roccat. At that point in time, something of a budget team. And for 2 seasons, Season 6 and Season 7, this is a team that had no playoff appearances in the EU LCS. They were bottom feeders with losing records in every split. Now, admittedly, in Season 7, with slightly better lineup, they did a bit better, but all the same, still losing records, still not a playoff team. So the assumption is he wasn't a good or certainly not an exceptional coach, and it's just getting these better players that's made him, as it were. That's why his team wins. As that alludes to, roster strength, right? When he gets his first big results, so Season 8 initially, he has 3 of the best players in the league at their roles, or at the very least contenders for it, in Wonder as a top laner, Jankos as a jungler, and Perkz as a mid laner. And they'd actually been some of the better players in their roles before he'd gotten them. So okay, fair enough. That's the problem there. It's not like he's brought them up. It's like he seems to have done something different to make them much better. Then you have to consider that after that, in Season 9, he's gotten arguably the most insane Western assembly of talent ever witnessed. These are players in all 5 positions that have been contenders for best in their role on numerous occasions, and particularly while they were under his management. So the logic goes, well, anyone, any good or above average coach would have done well with these players, would have won with these players, maybe could have done what he did. Crazy aspect obviously would be said today they could have done more, but you know, if you'd asked people at the beginning, I'm sure people would have said so. They'd also probably think that, well, you know, I'm sure Perkz is the true leader and the captain and the biggest voice in the team. And you know what, the players individually in their own way are sort of geniuses at their roles and so creative and so innovative in what they're willing to do and can contribute to the draft with ideas. As a result, obviously have less limited champion pools, can play anything, can play new things, can play things they don't even play normally. So the logic goes, all he does, is manage them and then just, you know, be a go-between to the management and be a go-between players themselves and do the draft. So based on what they tell him. Let's address these 2 key premises and sets of conclusions. So first of all, we'll go back to Roccat. So look at the lineups he's working with in Roccat. In Season 6 Spring, his top laner is Freddy122. Now listen, a year or so earlier, 2 years earlier, yeah, one of the better top laners in the ULCS. At this point in time, not so much. Someone on the downslide of their career, eventually becomes a coach not so that long afterwards. Then he has Airwax as his jungler, and never was, quite frankly. He has Betsy as his mid laner, not a terrible player, obviously came from Gambit. Yeah, a decent player, but even then, we're not talking about anyone contending for the best mid laner. Tabs used to be one of the absolute best AD carries in Europe. That was like 2 or 3 years old. That was like 2 years early at that point in time. And he'd had some big slumps since, like in Elements, etc. Noxiac is the guy who didn't make it as Reckless's support. And you probably haven't even heard of since. Then you go to the summer split. In comes a guy called Parang to replace Freddy122. Exactly. You probably don't even know who he is now, and you might have even watched that split. Memento joins in the jungle. Okay, we at least know him. And Steelback comes in, not as a support as he is now, but as an AD carry replacing Tabs. Now, yeah, you know what? Admittedly, Steelback played well. Memento showed some signs. Then you go to Season 7 Spring. So now he has, as his top laner, Faxi, again, someone that nobody cares about or thinks did anything. He has Maxlaw as his jungler, but this is when Maxlaw's not particularly well known. He has Betsy as his mid laner still, and he has Hjarnan and Wadid as his bot lane. Okay, players that have had up and down careers. Hjarnan at one point in time, 2 years before, was certainly a competent player. I'd say average to above average. And then I often joke that he's like the Paul Belter of AD carry. And then Season 7 Summer, he replaces Maxlaw, or rather Maxlaw gets replaced, goes off to Misfits obviously, by Pride Stalker, a guy who had some chances and had some potential, but never really made up for it, and already never made most of it and delivered on it. So what I have to ask you is this: where's all the talent? Like, those groups of players seemingly should probably finish in those kinds of placings, right? You can even argue they overperformed in Season 7 Summer, because that was when they did, like, at the time, the LPL used to be like this, they did 2 different groups for the EULCS, and his Roccat team was unfortunately in what ended up being the most stacked group, because it had Fnatic, G2 and Misfits in, and they were the playoff teams, and they were the 3 teams that went to Worlds that year. So there was only one game that his team won less than the Misfits team, which went to Worlds, and obviously we know was in playoffs and almost a top 4 team. Against all 3 of those teams, his team went 1-1 and won a game. Now, this is a period of time, by the way, when most other teams in the league are not beating Fnatic and G2. So let's be real. It's not like those teams have got, those players rather, those names have gone on to do much since, is it? Like, most are retired, or they failed after that, or they were just sort of the same level. Like, there's a few exceptions. Maxlaw went on to be better in Misfits, but even then, he's fallen off since then. Hjarnan and Wadid came along with Grabbz into G2 in the Season 8 lineup and had some success with him. That doesn't go against him at all. In fact, if anything, he gets better players, and then he's able to get a better level of performance from those guys. Then Memento is probably a great example of this, because people thought, myself included, well, if he's getting all these early leads and looking so promising in a shit team like Roccat, who even knows what their coaching staff's like, then he gets his chance at Schalke, and he's got Upset, and he's got Odoam, then he's got... You might have thought, oh, he's going to go ham, he's going to be one of the best junglers in the league. No, he quite frankly showed similar limitations with better teammates and without Grabbz. So it's not like Dylan Falco, who by the way coached the Storm out of those Immortals teams at one point in time, even though, yes, they didn't have the playoff success, and obviously was in the Fnatic teams that was certainly one of the contenders the year before. So why wasn't this guy doing more with them, right? Exactly. Then you look at G2, the team itself, right? So in Season 8, this is before he gets Caps and he gets Mickey X, he's working with Hjarnan and Wadid as his bot lane. Now listen, sure, the rest of the map was sick, and it was a season whereby you got to Worlds, you could just monster carry through the solos. You could argue that's how overall they beat RNG. But you had the whole funnel period. Early on in the season, you still had Ardent going on, where obviously you have to have a competent bot lane in terms of what they're going to know what to do at later points in the game. Now, you could argue he got the most out of that bot lane, his former players, and he was the right person to even have those players. Then you look at their results in Season 8. They also kind of did what they were supposed to do, right? He's getting his players. He's not underperforming with them. If anything, he's slightly exceeding performances in terms of when he had Roccat, the worst players, and now he has some better players, some of the best players. He exceeds overall performance for the entire year, because they had winning records in all the splits. They're the runners-up in the spring split, but this is against the Fnatic team that at the time looked like it was going to be the best Western team in history and went to Worlds finals. Then in the summer, admittedly, they got kind of hard counted by Misfits and they lost in the first round, but then they win the gauntlet and they go to Worlds. What happens at Worlds, do you say? They only go and match at that point in time the best run in the history of any Western team at Worlds, which is they go all the way to the semi-finals. Now, admittedly, Fnatic then overtakes them and goes to the finals, but you know what? Fnatic didn't play against RNG, so we don't really know how that one was shaken out, quite frankly. Now, what does he do at Worlds to get to that semi-final? His team beats the best team in the world, RNG, with arguably the best player in the world, Uzi, and who are then going for contender status of best single team in history and one of the best teams to ever play League of Legends. And his team beats them straight up in a best of 5 at a point in time where they've just been bodying everyone all year long, and they've won the 2 LPL splits, they've won MSI, they're coming into this one, and even though, yes, they're not looking as good by the time they reach G2, they're heavily expected to win, not least since their AD carry is supposed to be a million times better than the AD carry of G2. So, listen, I will say, admittedly, he certainly got a little bit of help from the meta. RNG was a heavily bot-focused team, and they didn't bring their substitute Zitai as the top laner, so they couldn't pivot in that sense, and they kind of forced it a little bit, and obviously this was the solo laners carrying a lot of the tournament. Don't tell anyone from Fnatic that. So, you go and you look. Let's go and look at Season 9 and Season 10. Now he has the best players, sure. But you know what? If you think that's the end of the journey, rather than the beginning of a different journey, I would suspect you don't know much about coaching. You don't know much about how tricky it is to work with superstar players and massive egos and names. Because now you must harness all of their talent. Some of the other guys didn't have some talent. You're maybe band-aiding them, or you're maybe knowing, right, well, because this guy doesn't have talent in this way, he's just going to play weak side. Or he's only going to be a support that roams, and this guy's going to farm under the talent. You can actually, it kind of telegraphs what you should try and do. Doesn't mean you'll be able to do it with lesser talent, but it makes the limitations actually make it a bit more predictable as to how you can and should play. When you have all the talent in the world, it's very easy to misuse that and to actually go ask those misfits guys and have a player where he used to be a monster when he was on a bad team, and now on a good team he's just average because they don't know how to play around him or how to use him, or maybe his other team used him in a very particular way that no one else can figure out. Then you've got to figure out, because remember that everyone can't have the ball, as it were. Someone has to be able to sacrifice, even if they are the best at their role, the best right now, and could pick a different champion and carry this game. You have to explain to that guy, it's not not the time for you at this point, mate. We're going to have this guy carry, but you'll get your time when it is, and I'll keep it moving. Don't worry, I'll make sure everyone gets their touch. Then you've got to bring them together. Anyone who thinks that's easy, by the way, doesn't know anything about coaching, in my opinion. That's half the fucking battle, if not more. You've got to emotionally bring them together. You've got to be a voice that can unite these guys together, not in any way be divisive. You've got to mentally bring these guys together so they feel like everyone's in their correct role. It makes sense when they have to sacrifice. It makes sense when they have to help someone else. It makes sense when they're the one with all the pressure to carry this particular game put on their shoulders. Tactically, strategically, you've got to ensure people are in their correct roles. I'm not talking about positions, I mean role within the team. Like, this person's the captain, this person's a little bit more quiet, this person gets to be a bit more of the outsider, this person has to be in the central part of the group. Then there's the whole draft element that has to complement their strengths, that has to cover their weaknesses. Again, these aren't always easy things to do. I've seen some of the people out there in the world, some very good lineups and some very good coaches, fuck up in that area and make missteps and have great careers elsewhere, and then have times where it didn't always work for them. So everyone, especially all the other coaches and all the analysts out there and all the Twitter fuckers who know everything, they all think that if they had these players, well, they'd win everything, wouldn't they? They're the best players. Like, give me enough stars and I'll win it all. But that is far from true. First of all, most super team attempts in League of Legends, true super teams where they're all really good players and then you put them all together, quite frankly, nearly all failed, or at least failed on some level. Like, maybe they were good domestically and then they weren't good internationally. And by the way, for many of the reasons above, in terms of what a coach needs to bring and what he needs to do when he has those superstar players, not just putting the X's and O's, the tactics and the basic draft for a mid-table or lower table bottom feeder team. Managing egos is very tricky. It's incredibly difficult, not least because it's a totally different skill set to being an X's and O's coach, or to being a guy where if people are just totally receptive and have lower egos and are very humble because they're just average or are slightly above average players, or the rare superstars not cocky. That's vaguely easy in comparison. It also has its own skill set, X's and O's, not having to do that and focus elsewhere, etc. But I'll maybe give them confidence in that case instead. One of the reasons why, if you look across other examples, this is often the way it's set up. So one of the greatest coaches in the history of the NBA basketball is Phil Jackson, who won 6 NBA titles with the Chicago Bulls of Michael Jordan, and he won 5 NBA titles with the Lakers of Shaq early and then Kobe for the whole time. Now, even though he won 11 championships, some people to this day would probably still say they think someone else is better. Maybe Greg Popovich is better, or Pat Riley's better, or you go way back in that, maybe like Red Holtzman or Red Auerbach or some of these legendary guys, because what they would say is, yeah, but he had all the superstars, like, oh my God, look at these teams he's getting, etc., right? They might say that. Now, sure, some people are going to give him his props, but people can always say it's the superstar factor, isn't it? But no one else said he had Michael Jordan in his prime in the same way, right? But here's the thing. Phil Jackson's won 11 championships. Other coaches who've coached his superstars have won a combined 1 championship. And when we say superstars, I'm talking Michael Jordan, I'm talking Scottie Pippen, I'm talking Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant and Pau Gasol. Now, admittedly, Chuck Daly did win 2 titles with Dennis Rodman, but Dennis Rodman was a borderline in terms of superstar status because defensively he was a stud and he would get offensive rebounds, obviously, and defend all the positions. But obviously, offensively, he brought next to nothing during the era when he was in the Bulls. Like, he was a much better scorer when he was on the Pistons. Now, here's the interesting detail as well. The exception becomes the exception that proves the rule, because the exception in terms of a coach who won with one of Phil Jackson's superstars when Phil Jackson wasn't there was Pat Riley, who won with Shaq when Shaq went to the Heat after he was on the Lakers. Now, not only is Pat Riley one of the greatest coaches ever, Pat Riley has the same rep himself. He himself is a rare example of a coach who can manage and keep together extremely talented teams with huge egos that have spent all the money and have all the expectations, but do it. Actually deliver upon those expectations or exceed them and win and become contenders for greatest team ever. We're talking here about his Lakers of the 80s, obviously, with Kareem and Magic and Worthy and all these great players and then amazing role players all over the place. So if you think there were no clashes in those Laker teams between Kareem, a guy who's a contender for best player ever and could absolutely have been played through for many more years in the Lakers than he was, and Magic, who was coming into his prime at the same time that Kareem's prime's only just starting to end, and himself's a contender for best player ever, I think you're quite misinformed, and you've been drawn in by the lights and the glitz and the success of the Showtime Lakers, and you haven't realised it wasn't always smooth sailing. They didn't just hand the keys over from Kareem to Magic immediately, and someone had to manage those expectations, presumably with someone like Kareem telling, we'll wait his turn, and you'll still have it now, and all sorts of shit has to go on that you guys don't necessarily know because, I mean, none of us do, right? None of us are there. None of us realise what an insanely rare opportunity that is, and then to make the absolute most of it, seemingly. So those who think they would do well or better are more likely deluded, or I would just say lacking in experience in this matter. Like, they've never had the players and therefore they don't know what it's like and how hard it is. Firstly, you almost can't do any better. Season 8's pretty impressive, right? That's pretty good for any Western coach. Season 9 is insane. This is contending for the best year ever of any team in League of Legends, period. I didn't say it in the West, in Europe, including Korean teams. Go and find me a year that's more impressive than this year. You might be able to argue some. Even then, we could debate it and I could do a devil's advocate and I could make a very strong case. Now listen, because remember, they only lost one best of 5 the whole year and that was in the finals to the eventual world champions. Now, sure, winning and having the best team doesn't mean you are the best coach. It doesn't even necessarily imply it directly, but it should at least mean you are considered for it. You should at least get the benefit of the doubt until people have reasons to doubt you, right? Or reasons to dismiss you, rather. Secondly, these people don't know what the atmosphere is like in that team. Yeah, you know what? You don't have to necessarily worry about losing lanes as much, or not having a good jungler, or having a bad support, having a good AD carry, and therefore having to work with those limitations, or more limited champion pools that make the draft as hard. No, now what you have to do is you might have people arguing over who gets what in the draft, over who gets to carry, over who has to sacrifice now. Now you might have to be able to look your players in the eye, some of the best players in the world, and the best player at their role, and tell that guy something that gets him on board with what you want to do, your ideas, and brings his ideas in. And if you're really good, as I'd say someone like Grabbz, and I think Youngbuck have done, make them think it's their idea. Make it so that that's why they're bought in, because they just think that they get to tell you their idea and you do it, and that's why you win. They don't know what you do elsewhere. They don't know how you relay that to their teammates. You don't know how you integrate that into your overall vision of the game and the meta and where the world's at, or how you communicate with your analysts and other people to get the information you need to then work with these guys on their minor limitations and smaller tweaks to even make a great player even greater potentially. The concept of buy-in here is essential, and these players in G2, as far as I can tell and based on things I've heard, have bought in like motherfuckers. So on that I give Grabbz an A+. If there is an S tier, he's in the S tier for that. Sure, some of it could be perks and the others, but I think the benefit of the doubt has to be given. And as I say, my own experiences, my own information suggest he does have significant impact in this area. Because I tell you what, star players, yeah, the shit player needs his confidence building or needs you to work with him to make him comfortable. The star player knows his game already. That's why he's a star player. That's why he's one of the best. And those guys will smell weakness or fear instantly. and they will take your fucking lunchbox. Think about players like Doublelift, Forgiven, even Reckless in some of these latter day Fnatic teams. It's been very influential in who the coach is, whether they're remaining there, and some of the considerations within the team and how he's going to play, whether or not what that coach may think. So you have to also, within these teams of superstar players, manage expectations and maintain the highest possible level where possible. Now, that means when you're on top, you need to know when to keep pushing them to stay on top and to drive for the championships. You also, though, simultaneously need to know how to pivot immediately to give them a break and not burn them out, or give them a 50% week where they gamble potentially losing some games, but that might make them stronger in the playoffs 3 weeks from now, rather than burning it all up at this point in time. And again, in this area, he has shown great aptitude. He seems to keep a nice atmosphere at all times. He's not like the Daylor approach, the guy who went 18-0 Fnatic, where he's something of a slave driver. He's keeping them on top. He's definitely the authority figure above them, and they're kind of relating almost like child to adult. And then that kind of, he's simultaneously their friend, he's their teammate, and then when he has to be, he's their boss, or he's someone in charge of them. But that's the other interesting thing. He also takes responsibility for everything they've done. So this is someone who's been able to help them past obstacles, or you're going to have to if you have a superstar team, and I would say he has done. Like, how about the nightmare scrim scenario at Worlds, where they were losing every bloody scrim seemingly to Damwon Gaming? SKT was a team that in theory is going to beat them, right? Obviously FPX, we know what happened there. Then they go into the playoffs, play those exact teams later, and they beat them both in an amazing fashion. Damwon, they 3-1. SKT, they 3-1. They're not even going to 5 games in these series. Then I'll add in, as I alluded to before, you have to be able to make those players think that even when they fuck up, you take responsibility. It might not be your fault always, but you take responsibility. And I tell you what, he's another person who does that practically all the time. It's one of the best I've ever seen. At one hand, deflecting blame away from his players, and yet also using the same media, this is something Phil Jackson was very famous for, to every now and then prod a little bit, or push him a little bit, or set up a challenge a little bit that puts their feet to the fire, that actually gives them an extra challenge. This is a level that most coaches aren't on. And if they had those players, you could misplay that and really fuck your team up. Then I'll add in, this guy, when he goes on talk shows and social media, he either can play defense like a motherfucker and explain away what's happening or why isn't that big a deal, or in those scenarios where you think he's going to play defense, he can actually say, wait a minute, I don't have to play defense. Actually, these other teams have flaws in it and no one's bringing up. So you know what? That team's got an issue there, and this team's not as good as people make out. And actually, look at what he had problems in the draft there. And in that sense, deflect and distract everyone from what's going on in terms of if his team loses or underperforms. And then you got to add in, he knows his players so well that, as he said on an episode of Elitist United, when they were before that pre-Loam final match, this split, where they were going to have to play Mad Lions or Fnatic, and ended up being Mad Lions, and then potentially Fnatic to win the championship. And everyone was writing them off because Caps had looked shit, and then they'd lost to Mad Lions, and Fnatic's looks, no one had seemingly looked like they were going to be able to beat Fnatic in a best of 5. And what he said was, basically, yeah, but because of the whole situation where we had to not have as long a break, and we had to go online and start the playoffs immediately, we thought we were going to have 3 extra weeks. So the plan was to chill in the spring and then build up and basically start boot camping and peak for the playoffs and do well. So instead of being at the 3-week point in time where we can then be at our best, we had to do it immediately because we're already in the upper bracket. So we lost the Mad Lions, and now we've had the time, now we've got it together. Now that's brilliant defense if he's semi-full of shit. Problem is, dude went and delivered on it. Like, he went and won those series. In fact, in convincing fashion, which makes it seem like what he was talking about, having that prep time, getting able to hunker down with the guys and figure out some of the issues and tweak things, maybe that they hadn't tried to address to give players less burnout potential in the spring. Well, guess what? It bore out. He got the results. He won the split again. Now let's throw in, it's not like he's only dealt with these players who were like, he had the best AD carry, the best mid, and the best... In Season 9 Spring, he had a guy who'd never professionally played AD carry before. In Season 10 Spring, he had a guy who'd never professionally played AD carry before, beyond obviously playing an AD carry champion in mid and Vayne in Fnatic, so don't be silly about that. Now, that means that he wasn't just working with superstar players, he also was working with a potential landmine for any team, especially even a super team. Like, how are you going to handle that? And isn't it going to cause friction if one of them plays badly? And let's be real, yes, he still won the championship. But that's the whole point, is he won the championship, got them to top form, and then when there were issues, overcame them. It's a very delicate situation to handle that kind of a role swap of superstar players who were superstars in a different role, and you're putting them in a new role, and they must perform in that. especially when you consider they had their blunders in spring both years. Season 9, Season 10, a little bit worse for Caps in Season 10. Perks certainly had his moments in Season 9. I'd say Mickey X was better that season, so it's also hard to overall figure out. We're talking about spring splits here. But you know what? They still won both of those splits, didn't they? And in fact, they won the finals in dominant fashion. So the players, remember, when they're on the level of these guys, because they can smell fear, because they can smell weakness, they can see it in your eyes. If he was only winning because basically he was just a puppet of theirs, I don't think it would last this long. They've had enough issues already. They could get him fired easily. They could get him replaced. They could even get an even better coach if they think someone better is out there. Now, finally, let's just consider for a second, in the same way as Phil Jackson had Pat Riley before him, there's a similar analogue we can go to here. So the Grabbz before Grabbz was Young Buck, because here's a guy who has a similar story in terms of having the stars, right? So how did it go when he won his 4 titles in a row in G2? Well, in Season 6 Spring, basically Perks and Tuck got all the credit. Then for the other 3 titles, Season 6 Summer, Season 7 Spring and Summer, Mithy and Perks get the credit. Mithy's a shot caller, is a genius support, and then is part of the best bot lane in the West, and then Perks is the best mid laner, potential MVP of the league. Then the international results get written off as, well, you know, you had really good players and really good stars, but they're too inexperienced or they haven't been there yet, and they get outmatched by better stars, or they have their issues in a couple of matches and they lose. So again, he's not even brought into the equation. He's just left out there, and you forget there even is a Young Buck, right? Everyone's saying it's Mithy and Perks. So then he goes to Fnatic, and he gets Caps and Reckless, right? So in Season 9, when he was like a director of esports or whatever, but he's still influential over the coaching staff, they're obviously, Season 8 rather, they have their amazing results. They do all the world stuff, all the rest of it. Season 9, now he has to overcome issues as the head coach. But he still gets some good placings overall. He turns around an insane bad record in the spring and has them still go all the way to 3rd. Then he has them almost winning against arguably the best Western team ever in the summer. Then they go to Worlds. And actually, at one point in time, it looked like they weren't going to get out of the group. They still get out anyway. And they make top 8. Okay, that's not a fucking bad year for a team that I know behind the scenes had enormous problems that almost no other coach I know would have been able to overcome. Never mind Band-Aid, and then still got some relative level of success. That's a great year for many coaches and many teams in Western history. So I kind of know some of the things he's done, and I give him the props as a result. Now he gets lots of credit from everyone, right? We all acknowledge the guy clearly has a lot of talent. So to be fair, I will add one piece of context to that. Both of these guys did have Perks, and he might be the GOAT Western player. So, okay, I'll just throw that in there, just so people don't think it's unreasonable. So let's ask ourselves, is Grabbz the best now or ever? Right, I'll just go out and say it. My bias tends with coaches and tacticians and leaders to be with the really tactical guys who like innovate the game or do something crazy. And as a result, often actually using some weaker player or piece and getting even more out of it tends to be like a really big boon for me. But even so, I always give it up to the guys who have to coach the massive superstars and then get the success out of them. Kane with Team Liquid, Koma with SK Telecom, the guy Kane or whatever with the fucking IG squad. So even in spite of my bias, in light of the intangibles that Grabbz is working with, and the out-of-the-game shifted focus, where he has to do a lot of work out of the game as well, due to these big players and egos and names, I have to give Grabbz consideration each time I ask who the best Western coach is, who the best coach is now in the West, who the best coach in the world is, because he's earned that. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Dean Tanglis, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, Tobias Bernasconi, and as always, a special thanks goes out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want teasers? Who are the guests on the upcoming talk shows, interviews I have? Maybe you want to take part in one of those Patreon donator discussions with me. Well, for any of the above perks and more, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.